Alright, another Sunday night here on the Reviewing Network Live, and that means, of course, it's time to take a look at the weekend box office, specifically the top 5. Although this week we have one major thing that happened outside the top 5 that is worth talking about, and we will get into that once we complete the 5 movies that are at the top of the list here. And, honestly, I don't think anybody should really be surprised where everything ranked. I think we should be more interested in what the numbers were compared to what the movies actually were placed in, because I think everybody kind of expected where everything was going to go. But the numbers tell a very different story, and we might as well just go ahead and jump on into it. Let's start off with the number 5 film, and that is, of course, Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1. So yeah, Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1 dropped another spot to number 5. It brought in $10.7 million, dropping another close to 50% from last week, 44.6%. It lost over 1,000 theaters for some strange reason. Like, I know the top new release this weekend had to get more theaters, but it's kind of interesting how this thing lost over 1,000 theaters already. Like, usually that doesn't happen for a big blockbuster like this. $139.2 million after 3 weeks, and comparing that to Mission Impossible Fallout, where that was at 5 years ago, Fallout was already at $161 million after 3 weeks. So, yeah, needless to say, this is not good news for this movie. You can honestly make the argument that putting this right before Barbie and Oppenheimer really was not the best decision ever. I'm sure Paramount thought that this movie was going to have the same type of success that Top Gun Maverick had because of how well that movie did, over $700 million just in America alone. But when you really look into this movie, the Mission Impossible movies have never been huge blockbusters. They've never been these gigantic hits like something that Top Gun Maverick does. The biggest Mission Impossible movie was $220 million. And that was the last movie, Mission Impossible Fallout. So these aren't like staggering numbers overall here. The movie is still doing pretty well when you take in worldwide numbers. I mean, it's not doing the best numbers here domestically, but worldwide, it's over 448 million worldwide right now. So it's making money. It's probably not making the money that it should be making considering the budget that it has on here. This is another one of those $300 million movies that we've talked about on the last couple of weeks. It's very interesting to see that this one, I think Paramount just made a big lapse of judgment when they saw what Warner Brothers and Universal were trying to do with the movies they put out for the number 1 and number 2 film that came out the week after this movie did, and it's biting them in the ass big time, man. I mean, this is a film that should be doing so much better than it is right now, considering the praise that it's getting by critics and audiences. And for the 3rd week in a row, it dropped down 44% from where it was before. Comparing it to something like Transformers Rise of the Beast, which was able to rebound a little bit after what happened with the week before, after the drop-off it had in the 2nd week, it's around that same general area. Transformers had a 43% drop-off in its 3rd week. This is at 44%, so it's not a bad place to be at, but at the same time, though, you'd expect this to make a whole lot more, considering the high acclaim that this movie has from both critics and audiences, and that Tom Cruise, this is a movie that this is one of the big summer movies we were touting for so many months now, and this is supposed to be the first part of a 2-part film, which is supposed to come out next summer. I mean, with Sony announcing their plans to shelve several movies off until the strikes are over, don't be surprised if Paramount get to put on that list pretty soon. But Paramount should have a win coming up pretty soon in the next week or so. We'll delve into that in just a second, but let's go ahead and move on to the number 4 film, which is a film that continues to stick around in there and continues to have so many questions about how it's making this money, and that is, of course, The Sound of Freedom. So The Sound of Freedom dropped a spot to number 4. $12.4 million, had its biggest drop, in quotes, biggest drop, because it's still 37% is not a bad drop for this. $12 million, $148.9 million from Angel Studios. Still one of the biggest surprises of the summer, and yet you still have a lot of questions of how this movie is making the money that it is. I mean, still a lot of question marks on there, and, we've talked about this long enough, and, I wouldn't be surprised if this is the last week we see The Sound of Freedom in the top 5, considering what's coming up next week, and we'll tell them that in just a little bit, but regardless, $148 million, it's going to go worldwide pretty soon. I think they said they're going to start releasing this worldwide in the next couple of weeks and months, so I'd be very curious to see how this one does worldwide. I don't know if this is going to have the same kind of appeal overseas, but We will see, but let's get to one of the more interesting topics of the week, and that is actually the most interesting topic of the week, and that is the number 3 film, the big new release this weekend, and that is, of course, Disney's Haunted Mansion. Of course, Haunted Mansion was the big new release this weekend, but there are certainly a lot of things we could talk about this. First of all, I don't think anybody really should be surprised that it peaked at number 3. I think that everybody was kind of expecting it, considering what happened with the number 1 and the number 2 film. But it's the numbers that are very interesting. Now, the original Haunted Mansion, when it was released in theaters on Thanksgiving weekend 2003, yeah, it had the benefit of a couple of days on opening up, of a couple more days and opening up on a Wednesday, but the 3-day totals for the Eddie Murphy Haunted Mansion in November 2003 was $24.8 million. You want to know how much this new Haunted Mansion made on its opening weekend? $24.2 million. This thing made $600,000 less than the Eddie Murphy Haunted Mansion started off with. That is not good. This is a film that was supposed to be a film that was supposed to make us forget the abomination that was the Eddie Murphy movie. And it somehow made even worse money than the original Haunted Mansion movie did. I mean, let alone this also cost way too much money. This film should not have had a budget of $158 million in a summer where Disney is just spending cash like crazy. The $300 million on Indiana Jones, the $212 million on a Disney Plus show in Secret Invasion, with a show that has turned out as bad as that show has done. That's a whole other subject altogether, because my God, Secret Invasion just, it's frustrating. It's frustrating that this studio has gone this pathway, especially from someone like me who's defended the studio for so many years, was thrilled when Bob Iger came back last year, and just in this last month, the cracks have begun to show inside of Disney. Like spending all this money and getting these type of results, that's not a good thing. And then Bob Iger makes it even worse, trying to make it seem like the demands of the actors and writers in the strike are unreasonable, even though you just got a lofty contract extension the day before you said those comments. And that's not unreasonable, but the actors and writers begging you to not use AI and giving them more money from streaming, that's completely unreasonable. And of course, there's now rumors that he's trying to sell Disney off to Apple and like selling off everything that Disney has bought over the last couple of years. It's just like, what is happening? What is happening here? Like, is this really, like, are you really that desperate to try to save your own ass? I mean, but again, that's a whole other subject altogether. We want to talk back to what the Haunted Mansion did, because this is not a good start for this movie. The cinema score for this, which is usually the reliable place you go to see how long the film will last, it's got a B+. A B+ is not the best type of a score for this, especially when you consider that another movie that we'll get into in just a little bit that opened this weekend also had a score of B+, and it's part of a genre that usually does not hold up very well. Like, compared to something like Elemental. Elemental has an A on it. The Little Mermaid has an A on it. Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, which has a B+ on it. Fast X has a B+ on it. Let's see, what else has a B+? No Hard Feelings had a B+. These are movies that did not last very long for the most part of the box office. They kind of came and went. And for this movie in particular, this is not a good start for this film. Now, there are several reasonings why. One is, of course, the budget for this film, which I've talked in depth about. Like I said, this should have been a $100 million movie. There's no reason to spend over $150 million on this, not whatsoever. Like, especially for a studio that could make these type of effects, because they've had these effects with Doctor Strange for almost 10 years now, and like this is the best they could. Is that they put all this money to that? Like, there was nothing in the Haunted Mansion that says that this needed to be a $150 million movie. You could have made this for a much smaller budget than that. But there was also the criticisms from people that, oh, why did they release this in July? Why wasn't this a Halloween movie? You know, this would have been done so much better at Halloween. I mean, why would you put this in July? Why? And a couple reasons. One, Jungle Cruise did pretty well here 2 years ago. Actually proved to be a sizable hit. Two, and something that a lot of people don't really bring into perspective here, kids' films don't usually do well in October. There's been those few exceptions. You get something like a Shark Tale, which happened, hard to believe that movie's over 20 years old now, and that's, I think, the only if I'm not mistaken, that's the only CG animated movie to come out in October that's done very well, like made over $100 million. Actually, now that I'm thinking about it, Puss in Boots was another example of one that did pretty well, and that opened up in late October. But would this have done well in October? I don't know. I don't think it really would have. Um, Maybe if you put this out on Thanksgiving weekend, like you did with the original Haunted Mansion, maybe it could have done a little bit better. I mean, the Addams Family, the 1990s Addams Family movie, did pretty well when that came out on Thanksgiving weekend. Of that is in '91. So I think maybe you could have put it there. Halloween, though, is a tough thing because kids are in school at this point. Kids are going to go out trick or treating on Halloween. October's successes, the most successful movies that have come out of October have been other movies besides kids films. I mean, we just had No Time to Die a couple years ago. The Venom movies have done very well in October. Dune did pretty well in October, despite the fact that it was one of those movies that had the theatrical and also streaming thing going on that Warner Brothers was doing back then. But I don't know if this movie would have done well in October. Honestly, I don't think it really would have. I think the reason why they put it in July also was because they want to get this out in time on Blu-ray for Halloween and on Disney Plus. So I think that's why they did it for the most part here. Those are the two main reasons that I think that this movie did that they decided to put this in July. And you got to take into consideration the top two films are still making a ton of money, and those are the movies that everybody wants to go out and see. I mean, Haunted Mansion did not really have a chance to really do well because you're opening the weekend after these two big blockbusters opened up, and you're really asking this movie a lot to take it to bring in as much as you can, despite the obstacles it has to face with here. And sure enough, look at what happened. I mean, it's not the worst opening this movie could do, and who knows, maybe this movie can definitely find an audience over the next couple of weeks. But there's only one big kids movie coming out pretty soon that could really hurt this movie in the long run, and we'll get to that one when we get to the movies that are coming up next week. But that movie's probably going to do a lot better, especially for a movie in August, which August is another month that kids movies don't usually do the best numbers in, surprisingly. When you look at the list that they have there, of movies that have come out, of kids films that have come out in August, not a whole lot of them have been the biggest successes. There's been one or two successes here and there, but not as many as you would have thought there would be. So that's going to be very interesting to see what this film I'm going to get into at the end is going to really do here. But I'm really curious to see how this movie plays out. I don't think The Haunted Mansion is going to do well here, at least here in America. But the benefit to something like this, that something like Indiana Jones didn't have, and something like Mission Impossible doesn't have, is that it's a $150 million movie that could easily be made back worldwide. I think this movie could do pretty well overseas. So I think this movie has a better chance of doing well worldwide. And I think it can make its money back, but it's got a large uphill battle to go to really make that happen. So, like I said in my review for the film, I thought it was alright. I thought it definitely did its job of being better than the other film, but there were so many story elements that they didn't really live up to the full potential. There were characters that were added in there that were absolutely pointless to the story. There were elements that didn't really mesh in together very well here. The movie overall I still thought was fun, but I definitely say that there are a lot of flaws to the film. But I did say that when it gets played on TV and Halloween in the next couple of years, I'll definitely watch it. I'll see it when it's on Freeform's 31 Nights of Halloween, that's for certain. But yeah, I don't think it's going to do very well here in America, but worldwide it's got a chance to make its budget back. So I think it will have a chance to make its money back much more than some of Disney's other movies that they put out this year. I mean, it's just it's a tough thing to do when you open up against these two movies that we're about to get into here. So let's start off with a number 2 film, and that is, of course, Christopher Nolan's Oppenheimer. Not surprisingly, Christopher Nolan's Oppenheimer is the number 2 film, but the numbers that this movie is doing is really, really impressive. $46.2 million, only dropping 44% from last week, but it has already amassed $174 million in 2 weeks. Then this has a lot of records to it. It's the first movie, the first R-rated movie to gross more than $10 million for 7 days in a row ever since its release last Friday to today, and that streak has extended now to 10 days straight. So that's really, really impressive for this movie. And not only that, but it has eked past Deadpool 2 for the best second weekend for an R-rated film. Like, Deadpool 2 if you don't count the adjusted numbers for Memorial Day weekend, which was the second weekend for Deadpool 2, $43 million for that movie back then. But this film, Oppenheimer, $46.2 million. It's amazing that they surpassed that. Like, that's a really tough feat to do, especially for an R-rated film. And this is only its second weekend. It's only already brought in $174 million, which is staggering numbers for that film. And the possibilities are endless of where this could end up going to. I wouldn't be surprised if this ends up hitting $300 million pretty soon, and maybe even more than that. But of course, the big story right now, the big story is that Barbie and Oppenheimer are basically running the box office right now, which I pretty much just gave you the number one movie. So let's just get to the number one movie right now. That is, of course, Barbie. And man, talk about a huge hold for this film. Barbie's second weekend is $93 million. Like last week, it made over $160 million after the adjusted numbers came in. But the ticket sales for Barbie this weekend only declined 43% from the previous week, and it amounts to the second biggest weekend in history for a film in its second weekend. $93 million. It joins the list of such movies as like Star Wars: The Force Awakens, Avengers: Endgame, Infinity War, Black Panther, Jurassic World, The Avengers. I mean, this thing did pretty well, and when you're making $26 million average for the last 5 days, this movie made over $20 million 5 days straight during the week, which is staggering numbers for this movie. That's really, really impressive, and that's it just goes to show you the power of this movie and how everybody just wants to go see this movie. I mean, this is a film that is a huge crowd pleaser. It's defying all the critics that it has for it. But even though most people really do like the movie, you have your backtrackers, of course. But $351.4 million in 2 weeks. That's actually more than what the Super Mario Brothers movie, which is currently the top grossing film of the year, did in its second weekend. Okay, it's just barely off. $353.1 million. I'm looking at the numbers right here, but to have numbers that close, and even though Super Mario Brothers had Super Mario Brothers' second weekend was lower than this, I mean, this is staggering numbers for this film, and honestly, it's going to be hard for this movie to get out of the number one spot, even though some of the movies next week might have a good chance at it. This thing could still be number one going into the next weekend, and then the weekend after that, and even into I think pretty much until the end of August, when Gran Turismo is set to open up. I think this movie has a good chance of being the number one movie for 5 weeks, I should say, 5 weeks, including the first 2 weeks that it's open in theaters. So basically, the next 3 weeks is what I'm trying to say. But this movie's going to do pretty well. I mean, they're already talking about doing a sequel. They're already establishing a Mattel universe, and I would not be surprised if this thing makes $600 million domestically by the time this is all said and done. It's going to hit $1 billion within the next week, no question about it. But and hey, enjoy it while it lasts, man. I mean, we're in this is one of those rare years where we've had so many good movies that have done incredibly well, like staggering well, like movies like this, Barbie, Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, the Super Mario Brothers movie. It has been a really, really good year for movies. I mean, 2023 as a whole has been a strong year for movies overall. There's been a lot of great movies, a lot of good fun movies. The summer alone has been really, really fun. There's been a lot of really good fun movies overall. So, like I said, enjoy it while it lasts, because we probably won't have a summer like this, for a year like this, for too much longer, especially with this writer and actor strike going on and these studios continuing to push release dates back. So that was the number one movie, of course. Barbie, $93 million, over $350 million in just 2 weeks alone. Possibilities are endless of where that film can go. But there was one other movie that I did want to delve into before we kind of wrap this up here. It happened at number 6, and it's a film that did much better than I think a lot of people expected them to do, and that is, of course, Talk to Me. Baby, talk to me. Let me put my arms around you. I'm sorry for that. Where's Patti LaBelle and James Ingram when you need them? I think those are the two that did that song, Baby Come to Me. I could be wrong on that, but we're not here to talk about that. We're here to talk about Talk to Me, which is, it's a new A24 movie, and the trailers for this actually look pretty good. I saw the trailers for this a long time ago, and the storyline is that you have a group of friends discovering how to conjure spirits using this embalmed hand, and they become hooked on this new thrill until one of them goes too far and opens this door to the spirit world, forcing them to choose who to trust, the dead or the living. And it looks like it has a mix between it kind of reminded me of the story of the monkey's paw. If you never heard the story of the monkey's paw, this person finds this paw, and they are given the chance to. It gives them an opportunity to have wishes made from them, and every time they get a wish, it starts off good, but then it always has to end on a bad on something terrible happening, like somebody getting killed, that type of stuff. It seems like this movie's taking a lot from that, but it's a very refreshing new take on it from the stuff that I've seen from it, from the reviews I've heard about it. And A24, man, I mean, they know how to market these movies by not going as gonzo as some of these other studios do. I mean, this has a $4.5 million budget. These are two directors who passed up on the opportunity to make their directorial debut on a DCEU film to make this movie. And the result paid off. $10 million for this film, which is much more impressive than I think anybody really expected to. I mean, it was supposed to make $5 million for its opening weekend, period. And it ended up making the best start for an A24 film since Midsummer, Ari Aster's film from 4 years ago. And give him a lot of credit, man. I mean, this is a film that did pretty well. It's got a lot of good reviews critically. The cinema score is B+, and I wouldn't be surprised if this falls into the same category as some of these other horror movies, as most horror movies do as of late. But they've already made they're already making their money back already. This thing doubled its budget on its opening weekend alone. So good job on them, and good job on A24 for putting this movie out there and getting people to come in there. Like, A24 movies, they find a way to get to people, man, and this is an example of what happens when you have that. So yeah, $10 million even here in America, in 2,340 theaters, which is pretty impressive numbers for that. It had a better average than Sound of Freedom and Mission Impossible: Dead Reckoning Part 1. I mean, that's something that's really got to be taken into consideration there. So, I mean, once again, good on A24 for handling that. I mean, that's a big thing to have there when you're not exactly in the top 5, but you make money that's close enough where if Paramount's fudging these numbers a little bit, this thing could actually move up. I doubt it, but either way, this thing is doing pretty well, all things considered. As far as the rest of the top 10 goes, it's pretty much standard. Indiana Jones finally dropped off to $4 million, $167 million. Elemental dropped off to $3.4 million, $144 million. I mean, that's been their biggest surprise this year after starting off so low and having the legs that it's had. I mean, it's making a ton of money, but this should be the last weekend where it has those legs until we get to the big new release of the weekend. Insidious: The Red Door, $3.5 million, $3.2 million to be precise, $78 million after 4 weeks. And Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, $1.4 million, $378.7 million. That one's on its way out, and the Steelbook, for the Blu-ray for this comes out in a couple of months, and enjoy it while you can, because Beyond the Spider-Verse has nowhere to be seen on the schedule for a while now, so it's a good chance we'll be waiting to see what happens after the events of Across the Spider-Verse, which was expected, but it's unfortunate that we're getting to that. We have to wait now because of the strike and the fact that the film is not ready to go yet. There were some interesting things outside of the top 10, too. Theater Camp moved up a couple of notches from 16th to 11th with $635,000. So far has made $1.5 million for Searchlight Pictures. The first Slam Dunk, which looks like a really cool-looking animated anime movie. I don't know anything about this. I just know it's G Kids that's putting it out. Did pretty well for its first weekend. $6.5 million. Over half a million, I should say, 625,561, which was pretty impressive for a film that did not get a lot of advertising on TV. But these movies usually tend to do well, even though they don't have a big promotion outside of television. And good on them for that. I definitely want to see it though. The animation on it looks really, really cool. I don't know anything about the film in particular, but it's definitely got my interest peaked just on the trailer that I saw alone. And of course, next weekend, we're going to be talking about Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Mutant Mayhem, which I think is going to do very well despite the competition against Barbie and Oppenheimer. I think the reviews for this have been coming out. They've been very strong. The buzz is very high right now. There's a lot of high expectations for it. I think the movie will do pretty well. One of the rare August animated films that I think will do well, honestly. And that'll do well. Meg to the Trench is another story, though. Meg to the Trench, I don't know how well this could actually do because of the fact that there is a lot of stiff competition there. The first Meg did pretty well, but there was not as big of a competition as there is now. So I expect this movie to make much less than the original film did, but I don't know if it's going to make it. I don't know if it's going to be a big hit. I think it's going to be one of those sequels that comes out and makes pretty much half of what the first movie made. And I mean, we'll see what happens. I'm definitely looking forward to seeing both of those movies, though. So that's the weekend box office as a whole, and I must remind you again that next week is our full-length preview episode of the Reviewing Network Live. We're going to be doing a full-length episode. We'll cover the top 10, the top 5 in particular, and if anything in the top 10 happens in terms of new releases or things moving up, we'll definitely delve into those. I have some stories that I'm already thinking about doing for this episode, and we'll cover some news stories. Hopefully we'll get some news over the week that will be worth talking about, some recommendations for you in terms of Blu-ray and streaming. It's going to be a good time. It's going to be a preview of what's to come for this new weekly show that I'm doing that's going to be coming up on Labor Day weekend. So once again, next week is our big full preview episode. Hopefully you'll be able to check that out. And with that said, thank you guys for watching, and I will see you guys next time. So until then, take care.